Mr. Moderator, fathers and brothers, ruling elder Matt Fender, James River Presbytery. I stand before you to ask that you vote to sustain the minority report and answer Overture 15 in the affirmative as amended. I would ask if the timekeeper would let me know when I have 1 minute remaining. I'd be grateful. Our report is before you, brothers, but just to ensure we're all on the same page, our proposal as the minority is to add a new paragraph to BCO Chapter 7, which would become new BCO 7-4, and which would read as follows. Men who describe themselves as homosexual, even those who describe themselves as homosexual and claim to practice celibacy by refraining from homosexual conduct, are disqualified from holding office in the Presbyterian Church in America. You'll note that this is slightly different than the language in the original overture, and I will address that. But why, you might ask me, should you vote to add this language to the BCO? After all, there are two other overtures addressed to the same subject matter, which we've already passed. Brothers, Overture 15 is needed. And the first reason is that it is indeed the statement we need. As most of you will recall, in 2018, Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Louis hosted the Revoice Conference. That event ignited a firestorm that has deeply disturbed the purity and peace of our church. At the 2019 General Assembly, we commended the Nashville Statement. At the 2021 GA, we received an ad interim study committee report on human sexuality. We have proposed and debated various overtures. There has been much debate, and much of that has been heated. There have been several SJC decisions, and there are more to come. The issue, of course, is whether a man who claims to be gay or homosexual also claims to refrain from actual homosexual acts is qualified an officer in our church. We're encouraged and grateful for the work of the Overtures Committee in recommending Overture 29 and to the Assembly for passing it. However, there is a need for further action. Whereas other statements have admirably defined the line, this overture draws the line. It responds to the risk of winning the exegetical and theological battle, but failing to put it in practice by giving a clear constitutional standard of accountability. Many seem to say that we do not need to make changes to our Constitution because we already have the tools we need. Brothers, I wish that were the case. Westminster Larger Catechism, question 139, describes the sins forbidden by the seventh commandment. It's quite thorough, and it teaches that, among other things, the seventh commandment forbids sodomy, as well as all unclean imaginations, thoughts, purposes, and affections. You might think that would be sufficient, but here we are. We're still faced with the same issue. What is needed is a clear and unequivocal statement, and that is what Overture 15 provides. We need to make this statement and add this language to the BCO to remove any doubt that men who describe themselves as homosexual are not eligible for church office. Our minority has recommended amending the language to Overture 15, and that's what you have before you, such that we remove the language of identity. We've heard arguments in the last year that using the terms identity and identify in the BCO is problematic because they are vague and unclear. It is certainly true that notions of identity are rapidly evolving in the broader culture around us. We're not going to solve that problem at this General Assembly, but we do not need to. The amended version of Overture 15, proposed by this minority, avoids that problem of subjectivity by removing references to identity and instead relying on self-description. This is an objective measure, and an officer or officer candidate can be evaluated based on his own written and oral statements. It also avoids questions of reputation, which were concerns raised over the previous year. The next reason we need to adopt amended Overture 15 is that it is clear and concise. Now, something tends to happen when you put 130 Presbyterian elders in a room and tell them to write a theological statement. It's the same thing that often happens whenever something is drafted by a committee. You sometimes get a statement that is filled with qualifications and ambiguous phrases. We saw that last year with former Overtures 23 and 37. There were concerns raised about the language and how it might be applied in various hypothetical situations. In an effort to adopt very general statements, we can easily end up with language where we are not sure what it means. Well, Overture 15 avoids that problem. It is the statement we need as a church. An objection may well be raised here. Why didn't we include synonyms for the word homosexual? Well, first, such a list would be long and constantly evolving. There are many slang terms that might apply, and any effort to capture them all would be like chasing the wind. The term homosexual is clear, and this amendment would give our courts the authority to determine what describes himself as homosexual means. There is no need for a long list. Next, we need to adopt Overture 15 because it is culturally relevant. Brethren, I'm 48 years old. That makes me younger than many of you, but I've lived long enough to see a baffling pace of cultural change with respect to views on homosexuality. When I was a boy, it was strictly taboo. Now it is deemed meritorious. Homosexuality has, of course, existed for thousands of years. It is expressly prohibited in both the Old and New Testaments, so we know that it is not new. But what is perhaps new is the broad cultural acceptance of homosexuality. And more than just acceptance, it is now regarded as virtuous. To be opposed to homosexual identity and practice is to face personal and professional ostracism and ridicule in the public square. We cannot overstate the degree of cultural pressure that our people, and particularly our young people, are under with respect to this issue. For a teenager or young adult to stand up for biblical sexual ethics takes tremendous courage, and there is a cost to speaking the truth. As the leaders of the church, we should adopt this clear, concise statement to stand true to the Word of God and affirm our members who are on the front lines trying to live faithfully in a pagan culture. Sometimes, in speeches like this, someone will say that we need to take a certain action because the world is watching. I heard someone comment earlier in the assembly, and I'm sorry I can't quote you, that no, in fact, the world is not watching. We are, after all, a small denomination in the grand scheme of things, and the world doesn't really care. Well, that may or may not be true, but I will tell you who is watching: our members. I'm going to fly back to Richmond, Virginia tomorrow. When I show up at church on Sunday, many of my brothers and sisters will ask me what happened to General Assembly. Many of them are very concerned about this question of church officers who call themselves homosexual. I would like to be able to tell them that the General Assembly took a clear stand. If we want to show true biblical love, if we want to show real compassion, then we should adopt Overture 15. We should stand behind our members and let them know that the PCA is true to the Scriptures. We will not compromise. We will stand. There's another possible objection that might be raised, that we shouldn't single out a particular sin and put it in the BCO like this. Brethren, I wish we did not have to do so. But given where we are as a church and the culture in which we work, it is needed. Homosexuality is the issue on which the fidelity of churches is turning. Many have caved in. The mainstream media applauds when mainline denominations ordain lesbians as bishops and celebrate false homosexual unions, calling them marriages. We included in our report a quote attributed to Martin Luther. I'm going to share another one with you. I do not know for sure if he said it. He didn't speak English, so he certainly didn't say it in these exact words. But either way, in my view, the words are true. If I profess with loudest voice and clearest exposition every portion of the truth of God, except that little point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing Christ. Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved. And to be steady on all the battlefield besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point. This, fathers and brothers, is where the battle is hottest. It is right and appropriate to specifically discuss and address this sin. Now let me briefly address a couple of other possible objections. It has been said that this language does not belong in Chapter 7 of the BCO, which deals generally with church officers. The minority respectfully disagrees. As the title suggests, BCO 7 addresses general classifications of church officers. Currently, the chapter enumerates 3 prohibitions regarding church office. BCO 7-1 prohibits the continuation of revelatory gifts. BCO 7-2 prohibits the ordination of women to the offices of elder or deacon. And in a single sentence, BCO 7-3 prohibits the usurpation of authority in church office. Each of these describes a categorical disqualifier that applies to all officers in the PCA. It is indeed fitting to amend BCO 7 to include another single sentence prohibiting men who describe themselves as homosexual from serving in ordained office in the PCA. Finally, brothers, this is not a magic words test. It has been suggested that this overture does nothing more than police language. This objection supposes that a man who struggles with same-sex attraction, who is pursuing holiness and mortifying his sin, could be disqualified from holding office in the church simply by describing his struggle with certain terminology. To the contrary, the magic words objection confuses the sign with the thing signified. It does not obtusely legislate language, but rather defines the standard. This overture clearly prescribes a standard of holiness for officers in the Lord's church. It serves as a clear and simple statement to complement the ad interim study report on human sexuality, and perhaps overtures 29 and 31, should they go into effect. Whereas other statements and overtures speak to the underlying theology, Overture 15 applies it. Instead of defining the line, Overture 15 draws it. Moreover, the magic words objection betrays a low view of the competency of our courts. Presbyters have the capacity to work with an officer or candidate to clarify and to exercise sanctified discernment as to whether a man is speaking imprecisely or is truly disqualified due to his progress in sanctification. In conclusion, this matter was a close question in the Overtures Committee. The motion to adopt the substitute to answer Overture 15 in the negative passed by a vote of 72 to 67. While we appreciate our brothers who are focused primarily on unity in the church, we feel bound by our vow to promote the purity and peace of the church. And this overture, brothers, does much to promote both. Now more than ever, the church needs teaching elders, ruling elders, and deacons to lead and to speak. The church needs to give constitutional authority to the clear and unequivocal proposition that a man who describes himself as a homosexual is not qualified to church office. This overture will serve the peace, purity, and faithfulness of the church. Brothers, I urge you to adopt it.